in the test kitchen today. Come along with me while I develop a breakfast recipe. This one is packed with fall flavors, super hearty, and will certainly keep your family full. And it can be made the night before for a stress-free morning. I hope you'll stick with me. Hello, welcome back to my kitchen. Test kitchen today, and the test kitchen really is a state of mind. It just means that I'm testing out a recipe that I have not yet perfected. Today we are making a breakfast strata, which is basically just a big, eggy, bready, veggie-y breakfast casserole. This one is great because it will feed a boatload of people. It's better if it actually sits for a few hours so you can make it the night before. And if you're one of those people who's always looking for another freezer meal, this one might fit the bill for you. This one's a little bit different in that it is very egg heavy, so you'll want to take it all the way through baking and cooling before you freeze it. But it'll last ready to go in your oven for reheating for a couple months in your freezer. The method is pretty simple. In fact, I'm gonna get going on it before I even explain the ingredients to you. The first thing that you want is a full loaf of crusty bread, and this can even be stale bread. I didn't have any stale bread on offer today, so I just cut and tore a whole loaf of bread up, and I've put it on a cookie sheet. I'm just gonna season it with some olive oil and some salt and pepper, and then I'm gonna get this in a 400-degree oven, get it drying out a little bit, getting a little bit more crispy. We're just gonna toast it. I'm gonna set a timer for about 8 minutes so I don't forget about this. I am notorious for burning bread, but this is gonna go right in the oven, and then I'll tell you about everything else that's on my bench. So the flavors in our strata today are very fall. Apples and onions, mushrooms, some nice white cheeses, a little bit of bacon. This one is pretty customizable though, so if there are different vegetables or spices or herbs that you like, give it a try. The base method to this one would be the same regardless of the flavors that you incorporate into it. So there's a couple different components to this strata. There's the eggy, custardy component, there's the bready, crispy component, and then there's all of the flavorings, vegetables, herbs, spices, fruit in my case, meat or bacon. With those three components, you have a strata. It's really no more complicated than that. So the first thing I'm gonna do then, after getting our bread toasting in the oven, let's get going on some bacon. So there's a couple different ways that I've done this in the past, testing this recipe, but there is nothing for me that is as good as bacon in a breakfast dish, as well as a little bit of bacon fat to cook all of our vegetables with. So instead of using olive oil or some other fat, which I've done before, I'm this time gonna use bacon fat. My favorite way to chop up bacon, not to chop it at all, but rather to use scissors. So I've just got some clean kitchen scissors here and about 5 pieces of bacon. And I'm gonna get this rendering down in our pan behind me, both for the flavor of the bacon in our strata, but also for the fat that will come off of the bacon. That's what we're gonna cook everything else in. Gonna give my hands a wash. So a few pieces of bacon, just gonna get those rendering down on the stove. So that's over about a medium heat, and that will be rendering out for us and ready for us when we get ready to put some of our veggies in with that bacon. So on my bench, I've got a ton of mushrooms. I am experimenting with a couple different types of mushrooms today, but I think you can use any type that you'd like. In here I have king oyster mushrooms, cremini mushrooms, and shiitake mushrooms. This is about 1.5 pounds of mushrooms. These will completely cook down into almost nothing. So you can use a lot of mushrooms. I have 1/2 of an onion that needs to be used in my fridge, plus another small onion. So together we'd call that 1 large onion. I have a couple of apples of unknown origin. These are apples from a tree in my yard, and I have no idea what kind they are, but they're nice and sweet and delicious, and I think they'll work very well with the other flavors that are happening in this strata. A little bit of thyme. My thyme plant is very sad, so I've just got a little bit left. So I'm going to supplement with a few leaves of sage and some parsley. So those are our fillings. On the other side of my bench, I have the ingredients for the eggy, custardy part. I'm using a whole dozen eggs today. I've experimented with 10 eggs, I've experimented with 8 eggs. Wasn't custardy enough for me, so I think a dozen is gonna be the right number. And then I have a cup of chicken stock and a cup of Greek yogurt, plus some salt and pepper and a little bit of olive oil. Then cheeses, this is cheddar, Comté, and a tiny little bit of Parmesan, but I think you can use whatever cheese you like. I've tried it with regular yellow cheddar and I didn't like it as much. I think these flavors go really nicely with a white hard cheese, so this is what I'm gonna use today, and I'll probably update the recipe accordingly. So as our bacon starts to make a ton of noise, I'm just gonna get started on the other things that are gonna go to get cooked down for the veggie component of our strata. So onion first. Just into bite-sized pieces. So I just gave our bacon a quick stir, covered it. Bacon can be really messy. I normally like to cook bacon in the oven, but for something like this, stovetop in the same pan was the right choice. I've experimented with fully caramelizing these onions, and while I love a caramelized onion, I didn't find that it added that much additional flavor to this one, especially since we've got the apples and they're a little bit sweet. So I'm just gonna actually not take these onions all the way to caramelized, but just sweat them out a little bit in some of that bacon fat. So a big pile of onions, and then a couple apples. I have experimented with peeling the apples in the past. I'm not gonna do that today. I'm gonna try to leave the skin on. It's gonna add some interesting color. There's lots of nutrients in the skin. So I just gave the bacon a stir. The timer went off for the bread in the oven. So I stirred that around to make sure I wasn't burning it. And I set another timer for about 8 more minutes. It's crisping up nicely, but it's not toasted to my liking yet. Just like the onions, I'm just gonna chunk these apples into bite-sized pieces. So if you're cooking with apple, and you are going to cut it far in advance of when you're going to use it, it's worthwhile to put it either in some water with a little bit of lemon juice, or to just squeeze some lemon juice on top of it. Since apples brown so quickly, you want to put a little acid on them to stop that browning process. Lemon juice works really well. You can't really even taste it either if you do that. Same thing with potatoes, actually. Apples and onions are all cut up, so I'm gonna move all of these things into the pan. Next up, herbs. So I'm gonna use 2, 3, 4 sage leaves, 5 sage leaves. Last time I used 3 sage leaves and I didn't taste any sage. So since we've got a lot of ingredients, we can use a little more sage this time. Sage is a very strong herb, especially fresh. So you just wanna be thoughtful about it. So I usually scale up the sage as I test a recipe. To our herb pile, a little bit of thyme. My thyme plant is almost dead, so it's kind of a little bit crispy. Normally I would just chop up these little thyme stems, but they're pretty dry and not super appetizing. So I'm just gonna pick the thyme, which just means to pull it right off the stem. Next, some parsley. Normally, I would reserve a little bit of this parsley for the top. I'm not gonna do that this time. I don't think it adds much to the top of a baked dish like this, especially like a breakfast dish. I do love a little bit of green on, frankly, almost everything that's savory, but in this case, no parsley on top. It's all going on the inside. Herbs are ready. Moving those to the side. Ah, that's the timer number 2 for our bread. Something tells me it's done this time. Yeah, it looks perfect. So you can hear how crispy it was. So that is just gonna sit on the stove and wait for me. Apples, onions, and bacon, tasting delicious. So next, I'm gonna build the custard. The only thing really left to do is build the custard and sweat out these mushrooms. These will take a minute, but I need some room in my pan first. So custard building it is. So for this eggy mixture, a full dozen eggs, which is wild, but I think this strata can handle it. So I often cook with eggs, and sometimes there's a rogue yolk. And my 4-legged friend has been conditioned that she gets that rogue yolk if there's an extra. So she hears the cracking of the eggs, and she comes running. Same thing happens with the cheese grater, by the way. Okay, there is a dozen eggs. Sorry, my friend, not for you today. Dozen eggs in. Give those a quick whisk. Break up the yolks. Salt and pepper. A big, like, 4-finger pinch of salt. Several grinds of pepper. Chicken stock, about a cup of chicken stock. You could use milk here too. I've experimented with that as well, but chicken stock makes it a little bit lighter, which I really enjoy, especially since we've got some cheese on top. About a cup of Greek yogurt. That will give it the creaminess in the background that cream would, but I've, through experimentation, realized that I like it to be a little bit lighter, and so it's nice to have yogurt versus full cream. Now we just give that a little stir. I'm just stirring to combine. Perfect. Okay, custardy mix is ready. So one of the things that I am testing in this recipe is really bumping up the number of mushrooms. And because of that, I need a bigger pan. So I'm gonna actually have to swap this out from that small pan to a bigger one. So I'm gonna do that now. Use the big boy. Get these guys in. Swap this out, our apples and onions mixture. Looking delightful. All I'm doing is sweating this down, but again, just didn't have enough surface area. So this whole concoction now onto the stove. Okay, our mushrooms are rocking and rolling over on the stove. Those are gonna take a minute. So I'm going to get this bread soaking in the custard. This is actually better if you do this a little bit in advance of when you're gonna put it in the oven. It allows the bread to absorb some of the egg, yogurt, stock mixture and just makes for a more flavorful, better textured strata. So in a really big bowl, all of my bread goes. I'm gonna pour in and mix around my egg and stock and yogurt mixture. Just trying to kind of evenly coat those pieces of bread with the egg. Okay, so that's gonna sit off to the side for a little bit. Then I'm gonna grease our pan, a little bit of olive oil, and I'm gonna use my hand. So if you don't have a tool to grease a pan, your hands are really great tools. It really bothers me when a tool is something that stops people from cooking. They feel like they don't have the right kitchen tools. To prepare good food, you don't need many tools. And the tools that are the most valuable are your hands. So our apple onion mixture is almost done. Just gonna put in the herbs now. Okay, it's been about 5 more minutes, and I'm really happy with where our apples and onions mixture is. I'll show you. And so it's going right in on top of the bread. Our bread has now been soaking for about 5 minutes, which is exactly what we want. Stir it all together, quick stir. If you have a lot of egg mixture that has not been absorbed by the bread, you'd want to cool your filling mixture a little bit before you put it in, or else you'll have some weird pieces of cooked egg, but that didn't happen for us. It was all absorbed by the bread. Egg mixture right into the casserole dish. Just even that out. I like to not mush it down because any little spiky bits that are sticking up will get nice and crispy in the oven. So there we go. The very last step is cheese. So again, I've got probably about 8 to 10 ounces of cheese here. A little bit of Parmesan cheese, some English cheddar. It's a white, really salty, sharp cheddar, which is delicious, and a little bit of Comté, which is kind of the same. You can definitely scale the cheese back if you'd like, but since we use stock instead of cream, which is the way I've done this sometimes, I think the cheese will be a nice little touch of richness. Yum. So the one thing that I haven't fully nailed yet on this recipe that I'm testing new this time is the cooking temperature. I've cooked it kind of all over the board, but I think what I want to do is cook it at 400 to start, covered, and I'll probably cook it for like 30 minutes. And then for the last half of the cook, I'm going to uncover it, and I'm going to bump the heat down, I think, a little bit. The reason for doing that is you want the custard to have a chance to cook and puff a little bit. You don't want the bread to get dry or burned, and you don't want the cheese to brown too much. Covering it in the beginning and then uncovering it about halfway through feels like the right way for me. So far, I've made a few tweaks to this recipe in this version, and I'll note all of those in the recipe below. I think this is pretty close to prime time. If I can nail this cook time, I think we're there. So I'm gonna cover this with a big piece of tin foil. Put it in my 400-degree oven, set the timer for 30 minutes, and then at 30 minutes, I'm gonna bring it down, pull the foil off, let it cook for another 30, and hopefully then we're done and we're ready to eat. Into the oven it goes. And we have a strata. I think I nailed the cook time this time. It was in for 400 for 30 minutes covered. I pulled the foil off and put it in for another 20 minutes at 375, and it seems to be done perfectly. I probably should let it cool a little bit, but I am both incredibly hungry, need to take a bite, and also very quickly losing light. So we're gonna serve some up. Yeah, it's cooked really, really well. I think that was the right temperature. Oh, I love it when that happens. When you test a recipe and you tweak just those final few things and you feel like it's good enough to serve to your friends. The bread retains some of its crispiness, which is great. I think those bigger chunks are key. I really like the cook time. I like the big chunks of mushroom. It's not at all dry. It's nice and custardy. No notes. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you spending your time with me as always. Please let me know in the comments below if you make a breakfast casserole or strata like this and what ingredients you include in it. If you like this video, please give it a like. If you want to see more from me, please subscribe to my channel, and I'll look forward to seeing you here next time. Cheers.